Hey everyone, Mulligan here, and welcome back to another episode of Eternal Errors. For those new, this is a series where we take a look at some mistakes I make during games and go over what the correct decision is instead. We usually focus on a specific deck each episode. This week I've decided to look at a bit of a brew that I started working on just before Homecoming released, and decided to revisit it with the release in Dark Frontier. I've recently dubbed the deck Big Stonescar, since it's essentially a Stonescar Midrange deck, but with a higher power curve that looks similar to other popular decks like Winchest and Jennev Midrange. The examples you'll see this week have a bit of a theme that focuses on matchup knowledge. I'll include a deck list in the video description for those that want to see it. Let's jump into it. The first game we'll be looking at is against Average Gamer, who is on the more popular tournament-winning variant of Stonescar Midrange with a lower power curve. The game eventually gets to a point where we both end up in top deck mode. I top deck Avara's Favor and end up holding it, thinking that maybe I'd need to hit a unit. But then this happens. Alright, so I could have lived if I Vara's favorite face. So I end up dying to a Flame Blast for exact lethal, which I wasn't expecting at all. In this matchup, there's no reason to hold Vara's Favor in your hand unless you also have another burn spell like Torch and need to do 4 damage to something like a Statuary Maiden or a Vara that's not buffed. That, or you're hoping to top deck Torch as an out to do 4 damage to a unit, which is a corner case. The reason why there's no reason to hold Vara's Favor is because none of their units have Aegis and none of their units have 1 health. If I had just thrown out the Vara's Favor for the 1 health and 1 damage, I would have lived at 1. Granted, the Stonescar deck our opponent is playing has a good amount of burn that deals at least 1 damage, but at the very least I would force them to draw it. Also, I needed to stop and think about what my opponent's outs could be, and their deck definitely runs Flame Blast. The second game we'll be taking a look at is against D Trooper, who turns out to be on Reanimator. I managed to have a really big turn 3 and 4 with back-to-back Champions of Chaos. Both fully activated the turns they came down. My opponent plays Carandon Merchant to likely grab Grasping at Shadows, since they were able to get Azendel and now Vara into the void. They also play Back Alley Delinquent to get Sabotage in their hand for next turn. After kicking myself for not using Torch end of turn, expecting to not draw into Sill, I make a really weird decision here. Let's see what happens. See, I could have went this and then God, dude. Alright, so the reason why I didn't quarry was because I knew about the Sabotage in their hand, and I was afraid that I'd draw into something I would need that would get discarded. So I'd rather take the chance that my opponent might discard Quarry instead of Desecrate, since Desecrate only hits one of their 2 main threats that are coming out next turn. The problem is that something that I mentioned doesn't really exist in my deck. The best card I could possibly draw in my entire deck that Sabotage could hit at this point in the game was already in my hand, Desecrate. Anything else would be worse, and at best I'd have 2 Desecrates in hand. So I ended up playing around something that didn't even exist. Also, it was highly unlikely my opponent would discard Quarry over Desecrate, since in their shoes, they would want to force me to draw another Desecrate rather than cut off my extra draw, but leave quality removal in my hand. Finally, we've got a game that's a little bit older than the ones we've seen so far. This took place during the Homecoming meta, a week before Dark Frontier released, and it's against Kamado, who is on TJP Midrange. We get to a critical turn here where Kamado has a Valkyrie Enforcer and a Jennev Merchant in play, with no Aegis thanks to Vara. Let's see what I do on my turn. So I was fully expecting Corviat Palace to come down from Kamado the next turn. The problem is I mishandled the turn entirely. I got very antsy and torched the Enforcer on my turn when I could have easily just waited until Kamado's turn to see if Palace would come down. If it did, I could torch in response to the Withstand spell and kill whatever unit it targeted before the unit got the buff. Granted, Kamado could have actually played around the torch by not playing Palace at all, or playing Palace but choosing not to cast the Withstand first, because on turn 3, there was a pause on his end showing I had torch in my hand. If Kamado was paying attention, he'd remember I still had the torch. On my end though, it was still sloppy to throw torch out there since I was forced to throw away Vara, who I desperately needed to deal with the next board he ended up with that ended up killing me. Thanks so much for watching this episode of Eternal Errors. Feel free to leave a like if you liked the video. For those new to the series, if you liked what you saw, feel free to check out my previous episodes by clicking the link on your screen. As always, if you don't want to miss future content, subscribe to the channel. Clicking the bell icon under this video guarantees that you don't miss any future uploads as long as you don't mind notifications. Thanks again for taking time out of your day to watch this, and I'll see you all soon. Take care.